Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. We'll dive into the world of cutting edge technology and innovation. I'm your host, Adima Zolkario, product design and AI expert, and today we'll explore the legal consideration and regulation surrounding AI for entrepreneurs. In this episode, we have a special guest, tech AI privacy and data protection lawyer, who will share insights on the legal landscape of AI. Now let's dive in. Hi, Omer.
Hi, good morning. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here. Omer Brandes is a tech, AI, privacy, and data protection lawyer. And we're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. Now we can start. So, when we're talking about AI and legal, there are so many new things that we need to consider. So, what are the key legal considerations that entrepreneurs should be aware of when they are developing an AI product?
Yeah, that's that's a very good question. As we all know, we're all in the same position, sort of, because everyone's struggling to um, will understand or better understand the consequences of deploying AI systems and letting users play around with these tools, but we're not 100% able to make sure that the uses of such AI systems are not being made for bad causes. And that's, I think, the main concept of what should we consider when providing any AI tool for mass use. We need to find a way to figure out what our end users going to do with these products, because there are lots of bad things which could eventually happen when we release these kind of technology. Alongside, of course, with all the benefits and good things and good causes we can do with these tools. But I as a lawyer and governments and tech policy regulators think of the worst case scenario and what could go wrong when they try to regulate the use of these tools. So I think the first thing we should take into consideration is that there's always always risks associated with the use of AI tools, such as any technology and probably any new technology introduced. And as a disrupting technology, there's lots of uncertainty about what could be the consequences of using these tools. So when thinking of developing new tools, we need to think of the worst case scenarios and what could go wrong. But not only about what could go wrong, but also about how regulators see the potential risks of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Even if we're very optimistic about the goods and benefits which could arise of our tool, we need to see what regulators thought could go wrong, and potentially we need to adhere and to implement um, any mitigation measures set by regulators. Now, yeah.
What comes to my mind is like the latest technology that what comes to my mind in the last like 10, 15 years is maybe social media. And it has been used for many good causes, of course, but it influenced society from in a very big way, especially Western society, and it had many bad qualities on the on the users, and nobody seems to really pay any attention, or maybe needs to be accountable. That's the word that comes to my mind. And maybe when AI entrepreneurs think about things, they don't really know what's going to be the end use, and they are not sure that they will have any consequences with that. So what comes to your mind about, like, yeah, maybe someone would ask us, but we are not responsible for that?
Right. So accountability is a very major concept when speaking of technology as a concept, and AI in particular. Um, we did see very large fines and consequences of um, misuse of social media. For example, if we think of Cambridge Analytics, that's the infamous issue with how to manipulate the public's opinions. Um, so the same goes here for AI, and entrepreneurs should know that they could potentially be held accountable for their systems. And if someone manipulates or uses their systems um, to do any harmful causes, and to potentially use these systems um, to manipulate, to discriminate, to deploy biases, etc. So the entrepreneur or the creator of the tool could potentially be held accountable if he or she didn't take all relevant precautions and risk mitigation measures into account. So we do see claims around these tools, and these claims keep popping up each day.
Yeah.
We initially saw a very large class action in California brought against OpenAI and Microsoft and GitHub around code generation, and then we saw the same class action by the same plaintiff, actually the same group of people, um, also claiming that stable diffusion and stability AI and image creation um, models are potentially infringing IP of creators. And now we see the same claims being filed against ChatGPT, and against Google Bard and Google, and it's a very popular trend to go and file these kind of actions against the large tech companies which provide us with these platforms and technology. So we do see that people are trying to find who's accountable, and trying to um, prevent these tools from doing certain use of IP material, personal data, or even any of our data out there. So there's a struggle between innovation and entrepreneurs trying to run as fast as they can to provide us with these tools, and the conservative approach, saying that you can't do whatever you want, because eventually for deploying and releasing these kind of AI products, you need to train these large models on our data, our personal data, our confidential data, our code, etc. So we do see a struggle here, and we do see people who are trying to find who's accountable for these so-called infringements. So this is
Yeah, but when we're thinking about who's accountable, so there is a company, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft. These companies are entities, right? And they're supposed to be accountable for use of data that they were not allowed to, or for use of different data source that they were not supposed to, or the output that takes the talent and years of creation from coders or artists or musicians, and they could do whatever they want. And we know right now there is a I think in Hollywood, all the actors and writers and everyone are against what's going on. And like when you're thinking about people who created all these things for years and like all our culture more or less, what could they do? They wouldn't go to Sam Altman and what would they do actually?
So I think what we're seeing in Hollywood is a very good example. They are striking. They say we won't continue to provide you with the content you are used to get from us because you are about to replace us. They don't. I don't think they are specifically trying to find any victim or anyone who's responsible for their potential harm of their occupations. I think they're trying to warn us that if we won't be careful or provide them with any other benefit mechanism of their work, we're not going to see them anymore, and we're not going to enjoy their work anymore because they're going to be replaced by machines, by algorithms. So there's a thin line between finding and accusing a specific person and trying to set him accountable for any harm and protesting against the changes we are going to see in various industries. One of them is acting profession. I think that they're not specifically trying to accuse any specific person, but if we go back to the legal aspect of who's accountable, I think that if you're operating under a company, you could potentially also be held liable personally if you did something or had to know something or had to prevent anything, and you negligently ignored it and didn't do or didn't put the relevant risk mitigation measures in place. So these
Yeah.
emerging regulations could also potentially lead to personal claims against entrepreneurs. But I think the way to get there is very far.
Mm. So when we're thinking about someone who's currently developing an AI tool or thinking about doing so, so how do privacy and data protection law impact the development and the use? What should they do in order to protect themselves?
Right. So privacy and data protection is I think one aspect, and he this aspect is getting to the headlines. I think the reason for privacy and data security being discussed as one major concept is um, mainly because this issue was heavily regulated, and there are uh, lots of very strong regulatory authorities, mostly in Europe, which deals with these topics, and these authorities naturally responded um, when seeing these new tools and try to stop and to mitigate um, the potential infringement of privacy rights and also data security measures. So this is one of these topics. This is a very important topic. So I think when entrepreneurs think of how should we design these kind of tools, there's a concept in privacy regulation titled privacy by design, and this goes as well as to data security and data protection. When designing a new technology, entrepreneurs are expected to take into consideration privacy concept, um, even if from the very first beginning, from initiation of when designing the product, you need to think of how should uh, this product specifically collect personal data, and if not intentionally, um, how should you design the product to deal with personal data accidentally or not intentionally collected by your tool, and provide the relevant implementation of privacy regulation into your tool. So I think if an entrepreneur takes these concepts into account when designing the new technology, it's it makes things a lot easier in the sense that if he thinks ahead of what could be what personal data could be involved, and how should the tool delete or not process this data, it'll be very easy for him to avoid any risks
Yeah.
associated with personal data.
It
Um,
seems to me that this kind of like the GDPR elaboration, maybe it's connected to that, is kind of easier for entrepreneur because they know what is the law saying. The law is saying that you need to protect the data that it passes through your system, and if it's a private data, it needs to be placed in a specific database or a specific location, so forth, in order to protect it. And I think that this part might be in their awareness. But all the other parts of IP infringement, right, using other people's talents and work and maybe the impact of what they're doing on the end users. For example, what is the system telling them to do to say all the like protecting their health, protecting their well-being, while the creation of this output is not always mitigated by them. Sometimes they're using a third party in order to pay them, and then, for example, if I'm using a, I know, OpenAI API in order to use their engine, what does it say about me? Because they're like, it's their engine. I couldn't change it, right? So
right.
what does that say?
Right. So I think the issue here is to identify all relevant or all potential risks of the system we're designing and deploying. And it's also very relevant, as you said, as you mentioned, to understand what system do we use. If we use an existing system, we need to combine the knowledge of what's technically available and what how does such system operates, and what are the legal potential legal risks associated with the use. So if you mentioned OpenAI's APIs, so we go to their terms of use and privacy statement, etc., and see what they declare of. But we also need to be aware of potential risks not specifically discussed or presented by these companies. So if we talked about privacy and data security, there's a range of known risks out there when using systems or creating these systems. So one of them is privacy and data security, and also we know of confidentiality issues, of data flows from end users into these systems, and we also know of ethical issues such as biases and discrimination. The use of such systems for automated decision making is also a major concern, because these types of uses could potentially lead to discrimination and lead to unethical results. And we also know of, as you mentioned, IP issues. If we provide any piece of content, whether it's text or image or voice or anything else, it could potentially infringe uh, any other right owner of IP right.
Right.
For example, if GitHub Copilot was trained off a large amount of code repositories placed in
Yeah.
GitHub.
Open
There's
source.
Yeah, open
Yeah.
source specifically. So
Yeah.
so there's an issue of potentially infringing any owner of this code, and specifically if we talk about open source, even if we could potentially use open source for these kind of new developments, there's an issue with non-permissive open source components such as the GNU family, and potentially the code generated by GitHub Copilot could contain any pieces of code which are um, prohibited to be exposed, or you shouldn't include it in your code unless you reveal your source code. And if you're using this kind of code for commercial use, that's could be devastating, and could
Yeah.
can potentially um, contaminate your code. And even if you're using permissive source code components, you could actually be in infringement of these license terms, because you are required to include code attribution and credit for the original users. So there's
Yeah.
a range of potential risks, and this is
I
I think.
want I want to talk about IP for 1 minute. Everyone who's using Midjourney knows that you could easily imitate any kind of artist in the world. You just need to know the name of the photographer or the illustrator or the painter, whoever. You just need to know the right name in order to imitate his work. Same goes for sound and audio creation. You could decide who's the musician you want to imitate. The same goes for any kind of writers or poets that has been in the past till now. And it seems that right now it's like obvious I could use whatever. And the same goes for coding, right? So I'm taking all the years of people in open code sharing of data. I wrote something for others to use. I didn't write it for someone to use instead of me, right? This is what's going on. So thinking about all the implications of all this talent and resources, and really what people has created for so many years, and they could do whatever they want, right?
So potentially they couldn't do whatever they want. There are restrictions. There's a very interesting trend with regulators around the world saying that um, potentially a company or any entity developing a large model for let's say image creation. So potentially, these kind of owners could digest anything they find online, even if it's even if it's an owned IP of any third party, because this kind of use is allowed for training a model and potentially um, developing any innovative technology. But what's carved out from these um, main authorization to do these kind of scraping or digestion of IP is that you could not potentially use these models to imitate or to harm any creators, any creation made by a specific creator, because if you're doing so in order to replace or imitate or even impersonate to any specific creator, and try to take his work, we saw people releasing out songs allegedly created by specific songwriters and musicians, and these were not actually created by them, but only trained by these creators' music, and these could potentially, take out take them out of business. So when regulators want to encourage entrepreneurs to um, to release innovative models, they almost always say that there's a little asterisk under this approval, saying that if the use is made to impersonate or to replace or to take anyone's creativity and imitate it, this is not allowed under these very major or broad approvals. So we do see a trend of regulators around the world saying that it is okay to scrape online data and to train models of anyone's IP, but you could not do so if you want to compete with any specific creator's creation or specific
But
professional
it
performance.
seems to me that this small asterisk that you just mentioned, it's in order to cover the companies, but I don't know how would that work, because generative AI creating these images, these audio songs, this like text, whatever, it could be a book, it could be a poem, it just could be an answer from an expert, whatever, it will replace these people. We already see people being replaced if they're like in admin, if they're in support, if they're in maybe sometimes sales. It's like this is what's going to, and of course with creators, you don't need photographer, you don't need photos, stock photos anymore. You don't need um, copywriters, marketing writers. You don't need them, right?
Right.
So you could say like that there is this asterisk, you cannot replace them, but it's already being replaced.
Yeah, but there's I think a major difference between um, using these tools for these kind of uses, this broad sort of use for content creation. I don't know, SEO or script writing.
Marketing, advertising.
Yeah, any of these kind of use broadly, you could use these kind of tools to create this kind of content. But if you try to interfere with any specific, any natural person's um, profession, there's now a class action filed by a group of creators and led by a famous comedian in the US. So if you're trying to make use of these tools to imitate and interfere with a specific, let's say, this comedian, you're training a model and asking and prompting it to create specific jokes and stand-up script to be similar as this comedian's type of show. So if you're trying to imitate and interfere with this specific person's work, you are exposed to, she could potentially sue you personally and claim that you are trying to compete with her and use these tools specifically to compete with what she's doing. So these specific uses are prohibited for now. But if we're talking about more broadly of the stand-up comedy, you could potentially ask these tools to provide you a script for a comedy show, and no one will have a right to prevent you from doing that because
But
you do.
what I'm saying, like right now, where are you going to GPT or to Midjourney or to Dali or whatever? You could say, create a photo like Annie Leibovich. You could say, write me a song or a play like Shakespeare. You could, like, you say, act as Joe Rogan and write the intro for the podcast, right? You could do that, and nobody knows that, because maybe it sounds a bit like I imitated his words, but I could do it manually with my brain. I could just listen to the way he says it. Nobody knows that I use these tools or not, so it's very hard, as long as you don't go to the origin and go to, I know, ChatGPT, show me all the interaction that you had with this person and we're related to privacy and all of that. But how could you know that they use these tools in order to create that?
Right. that's a very good question, because the proof will be very hard to be received. But I think that if you are trying um, to benefit from these kind of creation, you could potentially be sued by the specific author or specific creator, saying that trying to ask the court to prohibit you from sending out these creations, because people are mistakenly thinking that you're this person, and you will be benefiting and gaining income, um, on based on his creativity. So this is a very good question, and I think we're about to see very interesting cases in the future of people trying to benefit from the reputation and creativity of specific creators, and it'll be very interesting to see how could regulators and courts and these specific creators could argue against these kind of uses. And I think this relates to a wider question of the whole IP world. I think is about to change, and I think the way we're now used to see it as, I have my rights, and there's IP protection about my materials and my creation, and if someone wants to use my creation, he needs to license it or pay me any royalties of any use he makes. And now, as you said, the options for using my creativity are much wider and easier. And I won't be specifically able to locate any infringement, because potentially anyone could ask these tools to create new materials out of my reputation or based on my creativity.
Right.
How could I actually go to each of these infringers and ask for royalties? That's practically
Of course.
impossible. So
Right.
I think the model will change more, and it'll go to a direction saying that if the model, including my work and my creations, wants to include these into and digest it into this model, so the model creators will be responsible for asking my permission and paying me some sort of royalty. And we already see companies that go into this direction. There's actually an Israeli company called Bria.ai, which are developing a very large database of images, and it's based on only licensed materials. So anyone using these data sets to train models can potentially be assured that any use is licensed, and the consequence of um, and the content created by these models is okay to use, because all data included um, in the digestion of this model um, was approved and accepted by
Yeah.
the original creators. So I
And
think we will.
I've worked with Bria, and the CEO was one of my interviewee here, and it's a very specific use case that they took the data from specific like origins. Or, but I think that what we're talking about is laws against like using an AI with AI without permission for the IP, or the data protection, or something that is related to the impact of what they're doing. But when we're talking about generative AI, it seems to me that the impact would be so much wider. We're talking about the workforce, or changing the lifestyle even, or even trust that, could you trust what you see, because you cannot really trust what you see. So all of these implications, how could governments or regulators even take them into consideration, right?
Yeah, so we're seeing governments trying to avoid or trying to mitigate as much as possible the consequences of these actions, and um, the very renowned one is the EU AI Act, which is now in final stages of deployment, and it was already published and now undergoing last discussion between European authorities before it'll be published. So these kind of regulations, and we also see it in China, and also see it in different form in the US, not as a very strict and wide regulation, but as some sort of blueprint or recommendations of the White House. So regulators say that we do see potential harm um, in a very wide way, and we want to avoid it by um, having these sort of companies implement and have government rules against um, the harmful consequences. So if we will take the EU AI Act as an example, this sets different levels of harm when talking about consequences of AI tools. So there's the unacceptable harm level, which is strictly prohibited unless you're a government and doing these unacceptable harm to protect the livelihood and protect the security of your citizens. So that's um, the first stage, which is strictly prohibited, and then there's the high risk uses, which could potentially involve any discriminatory use of AI tools, which is heavily regulated, and for deploying or creating these AI tools, you need to register with the European authorities. You need to be heavily regulated. You need to regulate yourself, um, and to show that you mitigated all associated risks, to show the authorities and be subject to auditing. So these regulations try to, as widely as possible, try to expect the consequences and to prevent them by saying uh, you can't do it even if the intentions are very good, if potentially your tool is about to be used and could potentially lead to a harmful situation. You are exposed to very large fines. You're exposed to audits. You need to cooperate with the authorities, and um, very basically, you can't do what you do unless you take into account all of the
Yeah.
regulations when trying to develop your product or deploy it. So we do see regulators run and go to this place of saying you're not allowed to do these kind of things. But to your point, I don't think that um, the mere point of replacing anyone's job as a consequence of the capabilities of these tools, this is not very much considered as high risk, because everyone need to know that the world is changing, and manual work is going to be replaced, and will eventually need to be more creative and more innovative in order to retain our jobs. But if there's something associated with these tools which could be potentially harmful, such as scanning faces
Like
in order to prevent you
fake
from
news
entering
or
anywhere,
yeah.
right?
You know,
Etc.
we did not talk about too much about ethics, and I know that there are tools that would decide who's going to get a job or who's going to be fired in big organizations based on their data, and their data, of course, as human being is biased. And I think that the implications is much wider than what we're considering right now in these like rules, and maybe in the future they will change. But I want to go back to someone who's building that or thinking about adding AI to their tool, to their company, using these tools. So what would you advise them? What would be the things that they have to consider? Or what let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I'm calling you and telling you, okay, we're building a generative AI tool right now, and we just want to make sure that we're not going to get sued or would have problems in 2 years. What would
Right.
you tell them?
So first of all, as a good lawyer, I would tell them nothing protects you from being sued, because anyone can claim whatever they want. But if you want to make sure you're on the right path, you need to have a process in place. And we're now in a very strange era, and we're all learning of what are the new regulations and what are the consequences and what are the potential risks and harms, etc. But if you have a process in place of exploring the risks and assessing the potential risks of any use your end users will eventually be able to do, and how should you mitigate it? And if you implement this kind of process at the very first beginning, very similar to the privacy by design concept, you need to have a risk-based approach when designing your product. So if you'll take into these relevant risks into consideration from the very first beginning, so even if you'll find out that eventually the risks are higher, or you'll receive claims around the potential risks or harmful uses derived from your code. If you have these risk mitigation measures in place from the first beginning, you'll find it very or more easy to replace and repair when finding anything, any consequence you didn't want to achieve. So I think the number one tip for entrepreneurs is have a risk process in place and know your product, and think of the consequences of these kind of use. You could potentially prepare to only what you know now, but it's much better to be prepared for the worst, and have a very good process of mitigation in place, risk mitigation and risk assessment, in order to prepare yourself for one, for the regulation, and two, to avoid any potential claims. So risk mitigation process is a very wide concept, but today we know of very good materials and suggestions out there in the internet. And when we'll have a definitive or final draft of the AI Act, we'll also have very specific recommendations for entrepreneurs, how to avoid regulatory risk and how to assess their tools to avoid falling into the unacceptable harms or high risk use of the AI Act, which will potentially be, I think, the tone for all regulators. So that's, I think, the first tip give any entrepreneur thinking of getting into this.
Yeah. Wow. So I have like a few more questions, but we're out of time. So where could people hear more about your work and contact you?
So the very first place is LinkedIn, of course. I'm also active on Twitter. So I'll be very much happy to hear thoughts and feedbacks from all of the audience. Yes, that's basically
Sure.
it.
Sure. So Omer, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I learned a lot. And I just think about all the pressure that entrepreneurs already have, and now adding all this like additional thoughts and consideration to their mind when they're creating these tools is really important. And thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you found this episode valuable and insightful, you're invited to share it. And I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.
Bye bye.